Welcome back to The Grind. In this video, we're going to take a look at the easy and cheesy paths of the Act 7 Chapter 2 beta, and from a perspective of a player without the largest roster at their disposal. Now, this is going to be quite a longer video. However, I'm going to put some timestamps in the description below so you can jump to whichever quest you would like. Keep in mind, this is the beta, so things may change before the official release. So if you are working on the official released content, make sure to double check all the nodes. But this is to give you an idea of what potentially we might expect with the upcoming content. My least favorite quests were the first and second one, probably because I have, the least available counters for those paths. But this first one, quest 1, this freezer burn path seems to be the most straightforward to me because it also gives you juggling acts. So you do not really need to have immune champions. You can see Dr. Doom here. As soon as you hit a heavy attack, you change to incinerate immunity. That way you can attack into the opponent and not get incinerated. The only caveat is you cannot attack into the block, because if you do, you will get a cold snap debuff. Now, the issue is every time you throw a special attack, you can see it switches to cold snap immunity again. So you have to throw a heavy attack after every special attack in order to switch back to incinerate immunity. But this lane can be done with any champion. Just don't forget about combo party. You have to throw off special attacks before you hit 0. Now, even with Dr. Doom special 3, you just throw a heavy right after and you can go back into a combo. It does affect the rotation a little bit, but you can still make it work. Now, you can also use champions that are incinerate immune, and then if you don't throw a heavy attack, you'll be immune to that and cold snap. But of course, incinerate and cold snap immune champions will work great for this as well. Silver Surfer is great for this lane because each of the debuffs that he acquires, he does not take any damage from, and it actually increases the damage that he will be dealing for every single debuff that is on him. Falcon would also work for this lane because with the locked on state, you completely shut down the ability accuracy of the incinerate and cold snap debuff, so you can attack into the opponent freely, and he's a great option for the evade champions on this path. You can attack in without worrying about the debuffs as long as you do not attack when locked on is no longer active. And of course, you can always go for the ghost cheese, where gaining those debuffs actually converts into increased damage for you, and you don't really take any extra damage. The issue is on the special attack, if you do get a debuff, you will take a couple ticks of damage while you're waiting for the special attack to finish before you can then phase and get rid of the debuff. And technically, you could also quake this path. Now, another option would be this lane here. You'll basically just have to deal with a lot of special 2s, and being near the opponent will drain your power. Next, we're going to talk about quest 2, and this one is pretty straightforward. You can pretty much cheese one of the lanes with any champion, and I wouldn't even call it a cheese. It's just an easy path. But this path has power shield and life transfer. So your basic attacks will not deal damage, but your special attacks will deal tons of damage. And based on the damage that you do, you will heal back up. So your special attacks will allow you to heal a ton of health back. Even if you get hit, you can still salvage the fight. Now, the issue is if you get, for some reason, power locked or power drained, or you take a long time to build up to your special attack, you will degenerate. But as soon as you throw off your special attack, you should be able to heal back a lot. So champions that do well on this path are champions that have really powerful special attacks, because it will be further amplified by this node. And you can see in this fight, I took a lot of hits, and here I'm almost dead, but boom, that first hit healed me back to full. So really, you can use any champion and brawl through this path without too much difficulty. Bring in invade counter perhaps to deal with the Spider-Man Morales, and Falcon does just fine here. I decided to go with the special 1s because that increased damage on the bleeds from the special attack seemed to do a lot better for me than building up all the way to a special 2, and I was able to complete this fight pretty quickly as well. Next is quest 3. Now, this quest seemed to have a few paths, and so I liked it a little bit better because there was options depending on the roster. So this path here over to the right, and actually all 3 of the top paths were ones that I thought were not too bad. Now, this path up here, the superiority buff gives you resistance to energy damage from those debuffs if you are the same class as the opponent. It also has energy adaptation with ice and shock, so you're going to take a lot of shock and cold snap debuffs in this fight. Also, with energy adaptation, if you inflict that debuff to the opponent, they typically regenerate 1% health per second, but this has a heal reversal node as well. So if you can find a champion that is resistant or immune to both and applies one of those debuffs, you can have a continuous healing reduction on the opponent to help you take them down. And once again, we have Silver Surfer being amazing for this path because he is immune to shock and cold snap damage, so he doesn't take damage from those debuffs. Now, I do have willpower on, and because of the heal reversal node, I do lose some health throughout this fight. However, it doesn't turn out to be that significant. And with Silver Surfer, based on all the debuffs that he accumulates, his energy damage is higher. Look at that 14,000 energy damage in addition to that 5,000 hit on the special attack. And again, we have another 14,000 energy damage. So he can get through this path quite nicely. Another one, mega cheese for this, is Ghost, because you will be taking a lot of those debuffs and you can build up those passive furies very quickly. And when you throw off your special 2, you can deal some ridiculous damage. But again, because you can accumulate those debuffs with the hits of the special attack, you have to phase right away after the special attack ends, and you may have lost a little bit of health. Now, Falcon works for this as well if you only attack during the lock-on state. However, you can still get debuffs when they attack you. Even if you parry, you can still take some debuffs, and because willpower is heal reversed, you really don't want to take many debuffs at all. And of course, you don't want to attack like I just did outside of lock-on. So Falcon is a bit tedious for this, but it is an option and you might be able to get through it. Now, I did test the superiority buff, so if you have enough buffs on, it reduces the damage that you take from those debuffs. But again, with the combination of willpower, it kind of makes it a challenge because it doesn't seem like it completely negates all the damage from those debuffs, even when you have many buffs stacked up. Even with Magneto at 35 prowess, I seem to be taking more damage than I would have expected to, despite having that same class with the superiority buff. So I'm not sure if it was working properly or if maybe it's just not as effective as I would have hoped. Now, there is another path here that you can choose, which is not that bad. Once you get above 33% power, you gain a power gain buff, but if you reach 75%, you'll lose all your power immediately. Also, a special 2 specialist. So if you use your special 2, you do 50% more damage, but all other special attacks deal 50% less damage. So you want a champion that has a powerful special 2, and also all special attacks are unblockable. So this is a very straightforward, simple path to deal with. You just gotta be aware of the special attacks and check all the fights on the lane, make sure you've got a counter for them, and make sure you don't go above 75% power, otherwise you'll lose all of that power. And again, it more comes down to having the right counters. There are metal champions, there is Havoc, and the new Terrax, Ultron. So some annoying champions, make sure you've got the right counters for this lane. And another option as well on the top here is a Thorns path. So if you have good counters for Thorns, then this is an option, but interestingly, with the superiority and some other buffs, one of the nodes, depending on how many debuffs you have, you will ignore some of that damage back, up to 90% of the Thorns damage you take back. But if you are the same class, instead of just ignoring that damage, you actually reflect it back onto the opponent. And this node also, there is a node that also puts on a lot of armor break debuffs onto you for attacking into the opponent. So if you have a willpower, that's also a nice option because you'll get some healing throughout the fight to counter some of the damage back that you're taking. But once you get a lot of armor breaks built up, if you are the same class as the opponent, all of that Thorns damage that you would be taking is instead reflected back onto the defender, and that can help you get through this fight. And I took a lot of damage from blocked hits and even taking a couple of hits to the face, but you can see at low health here, my health bar actually is going up because of the willpower, and all the damage that I would be taking from Thorns is actually being reflected back onto the opponent. So this is not a terrible path as well, especially if you have Thorns counters. It would make this even easier. And next we're going to move on to Quest 4, which also has some easy and cheesy paths that you can choose depending on your roster. The first one we're going to take a look at is the Slumber node, and it also has Flare. So your degenerating continually throughout the fight. You don't heal any health back, but your attacks deal tons of damage. So you want good heavy attack champions so you can lock them in the corner and deal lots of heavy attacks back to back, but also powerful special attacks. Now with Ghost, because they're stunned, you can lock them in there and get tons of Furies built up so that when they are no longer stunned and they start gaining power, or you're about to hit a special 3, you can then just throw off your special 2 and deal a ton of damage. Now, unfortunately, this 5-star was unable to get through, but if this was a 6-star with that extra attack bonus, it would have been able to clear that fight so quickly with that first special attack. Again, another champion that has good heavy attacks as well as powerful special attacks is Hyperion. So you can push him into the corner and just spam heavy attacks back to back, build up a bunch of Furies, throw off your special 2, and deal a bunch of damage. It did not go as quickly with Hyperion as it did with Ghost, but again, we get through the fight with relative ease, and we haven't even had to deal with a special attack from the opponent yet, and the damage is very nice, especially if you get a stun on after Slumber ends. You can burn through the fight pretty quickly, and I only lost about 50% health, so if you rely on having one champion take out one fight and a couple champions do another fight, then you should be able to get through that path. Now, this other path we're going to take a look at is up at the top, and it has Mixmaster, but if you inflict a shock or incinerate, then they cannot evade. They also have shock and incinerate vulnerability. And then they also have counter tactics. So if you evade, you get Furies, but if you hit 10, then the opponent becomes unblockable. And this is not a terrible fight either if you have champions with reliable shock and incinerate debuffs. The even better thing is that the shock and incinerates not only prevent evade from Mixmaster, but also prevent auto block. And so if you have a shock or incinerate active, the opponents will not auto block your attacks. And there are some champions on this path like Darkhawk, for example, that can be very annoying because of the auto block feature. So as long as you can apply a shock or incinerate, you won't have to worry about that. But once it goes down, you do have to be careful about the Mixmaster evade and the champion's auto block abilities. As you can see here, there's an auto block and then there is an evade. So you do have to be careful about that. But if you can pay attention and play around that, this fight is not that bad. Sunspot is probably one of the best options because of the very easy access to incinerates that you can keep up pretty much constantly, as well as the huge damage potential Sunspot already has added on to the incinerate vulnerability. We're going to skip ahead. Here's another example of when there is no incinerate active, you have to be careful about the evade. And then look at this damage. Those huge numbers are crazy, 150,000 damage on that last hit. So Sunspot is an absolutely fantastic option here if you do happen to have him. And then I did want to take a look at one of the more interesting paths. I think it is a fun path if you have enough of the right champions, but it doesn't really have a lot of variability. You can just do these fights. They are Mighty Charge is the main node in this path here. And if you can play normally against Mighty Charge, that's fine. But if you have Superiority, which is the class disadvantage, then anytime a buff is purified, for example, by Mighty Charge, for each buff active, there's a 20% chance that it will stun the target. So let's take a look at how that interacts. Oh, and there is also stun vulnerability, so when they're stunned, they take more damage. So you can see I have class disadvantage. I have several buffs I'm stacking up with those incinerates. As soon as she charges, she gets stunned because I had enough to make 100% chance to stun. However, if there's only one, there is a chance they won't stun, so it's not 100% reliable, and you do have to have champions with the class disadvantage to all the fights, as well as have multiple debuffs able to be stacked upon the opponent with that class. Now, if you don't have that and you want to still take this path, you can just play it like normal Mighty Charge. So you might have to get used to repairing so you take less damage from that first hit and then parry the second hit. And Wasp is nice because of the stun vulnerability. With that passive stun, that first hit does a little extra damage and you can get a stun off the special one. So there is some extra potential for some extra damage there. But again, just doing the reparries, you can get through this lane pretty easy. It wouldn't be too challenging as long as you're okay with the Mighty Charge and not charging in for intercept. Ghost is also an option for this path as long as you don't dash in your attack while they are still unstoppable. Like there you'll see you can get hit, but if you delay that attack just slightly, then you can get that intercept after that first hit. Otherwise, you can just let them attack you twice. So wait for the second hit before you phase out and attack the opponent. So you can work around that with Ghost as well. Now let's get into quest number 5. And there are a lot of potential paths you could take here depending on your roster. We're going to briefly touch on them all and then look at some gameplay on a few. So this path over here, if you have Power Sting champions like the new Spider Ham, Emma, and say Wasp, and you have a good team of Sting champions, then this might be an easy path for you. The next one here, if you have a lot of good villains, this is a special 1, special 2, special 3 path. But if you have a villain champion, then the heavy attacks apply a taunt, so they will bait out the special attacks, and you don't have to worry about the special 3. So that's also a fairly decent path that you can take, especially if you got Dr. Doom. This path here is Rage and Power Shield, as well as Hurt Locker. So champions with high damage special attacks are great, and just don't use the same one twice. And then Aspect of War, but there's also Heavy Assault. So if you have very strong heavy attack champions, you can do tons of damage with those heavy attacks. Lock them in the corner as often as you can and deal tons of damage. And then this next path is the absolutely most cheesy path you can take with Ghost, because you can stack up some huge damage because of the superiority as a villain. Every time you make the opponent miss, you get a Fury buff, and the phasing counts as the opponent missing. And then missing in action, whenever the opponent's buff ends, if you do a heavier special in enough time, then you get a falter debuff applied to them. But if you don't land a heavy or special attack, then you will be faltered and miss your next attack. And then this next path has shock energy adaptation, so you want shock immune, and you also don't want to apply shock, otherwise the opponent will heal. There's also bleed and stun fusion, so if you stun and then bleed the opponent, it'll turn into a poison. So now let's take a look at the one where the villains can stack taunt debuffs on the heavy attack so that you can bypass them throwing their special 3. And basically every time you special attack, you apply a taunt debuff. If you throw another special attack while that taunt is active, it just resets the time on it. It doesn't stack multiple. And this allows you to bait out special attacks and avoid them having to throw their special 3 in that rotation. But if you're using Dr. Doom, you don't need or want them to throw special attacks most of the time anyway. Ghost is also a good option for these fights, and pretty much any villain works as long as you throw your special or your heavy attacks to land those taunts. The next one we're going to look at is the Heavy Assault path. So any high damage heavy attack champion works great for this path. You'll see some very big numbers off those heavy attacks, and if you can ever push them into the corner and bait out an attack and then heavy lock them for a few hits, you can deal a ton of damage, like 100,000 damage within a few second period. So Dr. Doom is a fantastic option, especially if you build up 1 or 2 Furies. Those heavy attacks will deal tons of damage. Wasp is also a great choice because you can chain on heavy attacks very easily, and those heavy attacks deal crits and tons of damage. And then of course Magneto is a great option as well, especially for the metal champion fights. You just have to be careful about the unstoppable with the special attacks, and unfortunately Magneto doesn't stop that. But if you have a few champions like this with good high damage heavy attacks, then this might be a good path for you. Now for a path that can be done with any champion, but most won't get much benefit, but Ghost does awesome, is this one where if you cause the opponent to miss, then you will stack up Furies that allow you to deal insane amounts of damage. See, every time I allow a hit to phase through me, I gain a Fury stack, and these are permanent if you are a villain, and if you're not a villain, then these are temporary, which kind of is pretty unfortunate. Now, if you do get faltered, if they have a buff expire and you do not land a heavy or a special attack, so you do have to be careful about that. But you can see after I've built up to a special 2, I have 17 of these Furies, tons of them. Now you see I'm approaching falter and I land a special attack. One thing to note is that the special attack lasts as long as the falter, so you can't really use the falter off of a special attack unless you have a champion with a very quick special attack animation. Now if you have a quick heavy attack animation like here, you can see I apply falter and then I sit there, and there's a couple attacks that are added on when the falter is active, so I was able to stack a couple Furies that way. And then you can see with all those Furies adding up, Ghost does a lot of damage with her attacks, just like she typically does with a lot of the fights that have a lot of debuffs. Now this last one here is energy adaptation, and Ghost is a great one for this as well because you can stack up those debuffs, convert them into damage, and otherwise you want to use champions that are immune to shock, but you do not want to bring a champion that applies a shock. Otherwise, you can see the opponent will regen 1% of their health every second that shock is active. Next, for quest 6, we have one of the most cheesiest nodes I have ever seen in combination before for Ghost. So Icarus is a great one for Ghost because you can get some really big damage, but we also have buff synthesis, where if you get a Fury and a Precision, it converts to a Prowess. And this just turns Ghost into an absolute ridiculously God mode powerhouse. So you can see every time you do an attack with Icarus, if you do a heavy attack, then you get rid of those Furies, but you can build up your own Furies. That's not really the important way to play this fight, because with Ghost, you don't have to worry about the degens that trigger. You can just turn them into Furies. But if you get a Fury on you from either the champion's base abilities, like when Ghost throws a heavy attack, or just from Icarus in general, every time you attack you get a Fury, and then if you dex, that will trigger a Precision and therefore convert one of the Furies into a Prowess buff. You can also do this if your champion has access to Fury if your champion has access to Precision, you're getting the Furies naturally through the fight, and then every time you trigger a Precision, it converts into more and more Prowess buffs. And this can turn into some ridiculous numbers. Now the build up to this is a little sloppy because I still pushed over 9 Furies and didn't throw a heavy attack despite having an armor break, so I couldn't phase it. But you can see here, when I don't have armor breaks, I've got 9 Prowess, 11 Furies, 3 passive Furies, a Precision, and some Cruelties, and we throw off that damage. That first hit did almost 300,000, the second almost 300,000, so we had tons of overkill. And in this fight as well, you gotta be careful because of Hulkbuster's armor breaks, but I have 6 Prowess again stacked up. Then we go and build up some of the Icarus, Furies, and then we get at least 1 degen on before we phase back and throw that SP2, and that one special 2 attack takes the entire health pool away from this stacked up Hulkbuster. And then a champion that surprised me, and I'm even more excited about now because of the buff coming for Angela, but if you just throw heavy attacks, each hit of the heavy attack converts one of the Furies into a Prowess. So you can very quickly stack up a ton of these Prowesses, and every single hit, you can see I'm just going to parry and heavy. Every time I do that, I get a Prowess from each hit, and this results in a ton of increased damage. So without too much difficulty, we built our way over 30 Prowesses. We've got 2 Aptitudes, and we built up some of the Icarus Furies, and then we threw off the special 3, hoping for some crazy damage, and we did get some nuts damage. I was hoping to one-shot, but unfortunately we only got 272,000 damage from that special 3, and then we just continue going back into the heavy attacks. I did get a degen on me, unfortunately, but then we go get some more of those Prowesses built up, and then our next special attack does a ton of damage as well. I don't think that it kills him, but it gets us pretty close. And I think we're going to throw off a special 2 here, 1 more heavy attack, I think, or just go into that special 2, and we got 20,000 there, 65,000, and finish it off with some crazy damage. Another option is Hyperion, because he does build up Furies from his base kit in addition to the Icarus ones, so you can get Furies with the heavy attacks and not worry about the degen that comes from the Furies if you don't manage them correctly with the Icarus node. And then if you just dex, every Fury you have on you, every single dex turns into a Prowess. And if you're evading multi-hit special attacks like Silver Surfers, for example, each of the hits that you're missing can convert a Fury into a Prowess. So you can potentially build up a bunch of Prowess stacks pretty quickly depending on the fight. And then you can throw off some crazy damage with Hyperion because he already deals so much damage. So this can be a lot of fun for a lot of different champions. So I do hope this one stays the same or very similar, because this is one of my favorites, and not just because it was easy, but it's always fun to get some crazy numbers with champions like Angela or others that might not typically be the ones you would choose. This is another fun one with debuff synthesis with stun and armor break that converts into a cold snap, and then with a cold snap active, the opponent cannot evade, and they do also have mix master. So as long as your champion has easy access to armor break, you can parry and then armor break, and that adds a cold snap, and therefore they cannot evade on the mix master. You just have to be prepared if you do not have an armor break going on with that stun to get a cold snap, or if you're going to try to intercept, then they could evade your attack. So Medusa is an absolute champion here because every basic hit or with her medium hits can armor break. So if you just stun and medium, that immediately applies a cold snap and you can go the entire fight pretty much without worrying about the mix master. So this is definitely an option if you have the right champions as well. And then this path here, if you have an armor up and then activate a precision, it allows you to bypass auto block. But really this path isn't that crazy as long as you have champions to counter the individual champions on this path. The nodes aren't that crazy. And so, for example, I was just using Doom against this Heimdall here and managed to get through the fight with relative ease. So I do hope this video was interesting if you managed to watch all the way through, and I hope that it was kind of fun to take a look into the easy and cheesy paths of the potential Act 7.2. But again, remember, these are beta fights, so things may change. But once again, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.